tip. Coming all 3 speakers. Good honest reviews, book shows, and the movies all getting featured. They all getting featured. Said it's Tanesha. Tanesha's tip. Coming all 3 speakers. Coming all 3 speakers. Good honest reviews, book shows, and the movies all getting featured. Yeah. It's your girl Tanesha, straight magic. The greatest book reviews, let's get at it. She not here to offend, she just honest.
Reasonable Doubt, Season 1, Episode 1. The title is Can't Knock the Hustle. So the way it starts is that we get this picture of Jax in a warehouse and she's like tied up. And you know, it's the typical scene of someone being kidnapped, and you know, it's dark and she's tied to a chair. However, the thing is, you instantly know that she knows whomever her captor is, because she says, you can't, I can help you, but I can't help you if I'm dead. So there, that was that. And then all of a sudden she, you know, blanks out and she's waking up out of a dream, and it's 6 months later. So from there, she wakes up out of her, you know, out of her sleep as normal, and she's doing her daily routine, which is she gets up, she takes her vitamins, she goes for a run, she comes back home, she showers and changes into her clothes and comes downstairs to greet her family. Everything seems, you know, pretty typical of someone, you know, in their family, that everybody's happy, until her son like greets her, and he actually says something very rude to her. Now she doesn't say anything, but she looks to her husband and they share a look, but then the husband says, okay, kids, you guys got to get dressed because we got to get going. So as the kids leave out the kitchen, she whispers to her husband, see, he's being a little asshole. And so nobody says anything, but it turns out that where they had all go was church. So what tickled me was that Jax and her husband were both in church cackling like little kids, like kids do in church, you know, like they really wasn't paying attention, but it seems like they were making fun of the people in church. And then one of the parishioners, you know, she was an older lady, she looked back at them like, if y'all don't be quiet, you know, like older people would do to you in church if you were little, doing that, acting up. So anyway, they stopped, but only because Jax got a phone call from, you know, that she had to take. So she steps out of the church and she answers the phone. It turns out to be another lawyer from another law firm that's representing a lady who had a relationship or some kind of encounter with one of Jax's clients. So the thing is, the lady is trying to say that, you know, she was SA'd or whatever by the guy. And after Jax gets the scenario, she was like, okay, so what happened? I mean, did he, you know, capture her? Did he do, you know, anything to her? And all the answers led to no. Well, the other lawyer tried to use the whole, well, I thought you would be on the side of the woman type thing with her. And she said, well, no, I'm just on the side of what's right. And so far, you haven't said anything that my client has done wrong. So he makes her offer and she says, well, I'll get with my client and I'll get back with you before your deadline. But she wasn't buying it. Okay, so we get to the next day, which is Monday morning, and Jax walks into her office where she has this good banter with her friend and secretary, and they have like some kind of like little dance, little song and dance thing that they do, and it's really cute. But anyway, they end up having a discussion, and she tells her how her I guess week started yesterday because she got a call during church from a lawyer from a IG model named Megan, who is trying to press charges against her client, Devin McDonald. And so the secretary was like, well, why does she have to be an IG model or whatever? And she showed her Instagram. And she was like, oh, okay. So she was like, well, what did she do? And she said, well, she's just accusing him of making her uncomfortable. And she said, oh, so you don't believe her? And she said, it's not that I don't believe her, but there's no law against someone making you uncomfortable. And she said, now, was he an asshole? Yes. So that was funny because, you know, she was just like, I'm just going to be honest with you or whatever. I'm just, you know, I'm doing my job or whatever. But he is an asshole. I can agree with that. So anyway, they agree with that, to get the PI involved in, investigating Megan to see what she wants, basically money. And her secretary lets her know you have a meeting, a partners meeting in 5 minutes. And she's like, oh man, can I just stay on the black side? Which is funny. And it's very telling because once she gets in the partners meeting, she's the only black woman. There's one white lady and then everybody else is white, right? And it's kind of crazy because the way they were sitting, it's kind of like them and then Jax, because Jax was like at the head of the table and they were like all on the other side. But Terry is, I guess he's the head person or whatever. He's the, big white guy that tells everybody, what to do. And then there's Rich, who you can already tell he wants to be the hot shot or whatever, or boss's favorite, basically. So Rich says, well, I got a call from Braden Miller, and he says he made it sound like it was very urgent or whatever, but he needed representation. And they were like, oh, is that the tech billionaire? And so Jax, she has her own knowledge of who he is, and she says he's going to be or whatever. And so then the next question was, oh, do he want us to handle the sale? And they were like, no, it just sounded like it was very, very important, and he, really wanted our representation, but I don't know what it's about. So then Terry says, okay, Rich, will you set it up? And Jax, you should probably sit in too for a list of clients. And she said, you mean the black clients? And it was like a pregnant pause where he was uncomfortable, and she just was like, she made a joke and was like, hi, I'm just playing or whatever, but okay, we not playing. But anyway, so then she also said, well, you guys, I think that usually when there's someone of that stature, they don't really want to present their case to a group of people. They only want like, 2 people at max. So it should probably be me and Rich. And so they agreed with that. And then we're like, oh, that's why we pay you the big bucks. And she says, apparently not big enough. Now I'm with you. You ain't wrong. It's always room to grow. So after the meeting, she walks out of her building or whatever. And as soon as she hits the sun, she's like, oh, Lord, give me strength, right? Then her phone rings and it ends up being her mom. And as soon as she, hears it, it's her mom, you can automatically tell that that's kind of like a strained relationship, because she's like, hi, Mom, how are you? And her mom is like, oh, how is my favorite son-in-law, Paul? And she's like, that's your only son-in-law. And then she was like, you need to fix things with him. Now, prior to this, I didn't know nothing was going on, because the way it starts off is they were, she met up with him in the kitchen, and they seemed like a happy family. They went to church together, and they were playing around in the church and everything, right? So anyway, the mom basically tells her, don't forget, it's my husband's birthday, this weekend. And she was like, oh, how could I forget or whatever? And she was like, yeah, you don't come around, but make sure you bring my favorite son-in-law. She was like, that's your only son-in-law. But she kept saying that. And she was like, okay, and then it's over. And she drives off and gets off the phone with her mom finally. But you could tell there's something more to that story too. Okay, so the next scene, she ends up going home and it's dark. As soon as she parks, some guy shows up at her window and she's like, who are you? And he says, hi, I'm sorry to startle you. I'm Will, your nightly patrol, and I was, hired by your husband, Lewis. Now, I'm like, so if he in the house with you, why you got somebody outside? Okay, well, what is going on? So I guess this ties to what we saw at the opening, somebody kidnapping her or something. I don't know, but we gonna see. So she gets inside and she tells the kids and Lewis, hey y'all, this is Will, the nightly patrol that your dad hired to protect us. And so he was like, well, I only did that because Mom works for these high profile people that kind of go crazy or whatever the case may be. So again, there must be more to the story. So then both Will and everybody is looking uncomfortable or whatever. And Spencer, the son, is like, Dad, I want to stay at your house tonight. So I'm like, oh, so Daddy don't stay there. Okay. And so both parents shoot him down. Jack says, no, his turn you guys' day for staying at his place is tomorrow, not tonight. So you can go over there tomorrow. And so he says, your mom is right. Because Spencer is not even really taking what she's saying. He looks at his dad. His dad's like, your mom's right. And I'm like, oh, he really is disrespectful. Anyway, so The kids end up leaving the room, and Will goes where he goes, and they end up in the kitchen, Jackson Lewis, and here comes the argument. And so he's like, well, I only got that just to make sure you guys are good. And she was like, you don't care about my safety. And he was like, I do care about your safety. Why wouldn't I care? And she said, you only care about, what you want, and you just mad because you messed up. Which she didn't use those words. She used some other words or whatever. Anyway, back and forth. And then finally she was like, I didn't get separated to sleep alone. And he was like, it's a trial separation or whatever. She was like, go home. And so he was like, this is my home. She was like, not anymore. I guess because he had left. But anyway, there's no here or there. He ended up leaving. She was mad. She took off her rings, and that's that. And I'm just like, ooh, child. Her, sending Lewis on his way and doing her woosah in the kitchen and taking her rings off. She goes in to check on her daughter and her son. Okay, so it's very cute because when she enters her daughter's room, her daughter has her headphones on or whatever, but she pulls them off and she, talks to her, and they do their little TikTok rendition, and they say, oh, we're going to be good or whatever. So I don't know if they're practicing on something or whatever, but it's really cute. They have a really good dynamic. So after they have that discussion, she says, okay, lights out in 30 minutes or whatever, and her daughter says, okay, good night, right? And so then she goes down the hall to her son Spencer's room. She knocks, and then, she says, hey, and he's like, hey, and he's kind of, doing his teenage attitude thing. And so she was like, so I just came to check on you. Is everything okay or whatever? And he's like, yeah, whatever. And she was like, sorry, my pup she heard something. Anyway, she says, lights out in 30 minutes, and he didn't even acknowledge her. And she turns around, she's like, did you hear me? And he was like, yeah, attitude and everything. So anyway, she goes down to her hallway to her room or whatever, and she decides that, okay, I really need to, just decompress. So she closes her door, puts a towel under it, and then she goes to her stash box, which has cigarettes in it. So she goes and sits by the window, opens it up, and she lights up the cigarette to, take a woosah. And who's looking at her? The nightly patrol Will. So he sees her, she sees him, and he is outside the car, in front of his car, and he holds up a pack of cigarettes as well. So now we know they both smoke. So the next scene is a brunch day with her friends. It's 4 of them all together, and they're just trying to catch up. And one of the friends asked, hey, how is things with you and Lewis? And she said, she just kind of took a breath, and she was like, but you know what would be good or what would help? She was like, prescription for Ambien. Well, the friend was like, I don't prescribe my friend meds because that I just don't. And so then as they were like, oh, well, what are you going to eat? They perusing the menu. One of the other friends said, well, my husband is having an affair, but she didn't say that. But you should watch it because she said some things. Anyway, so before they leave, they all give her a pep talk and tell her, hey, whatever you do, we're on your side, and keep your head up or whatever. And she was like, yeah, and whatever you need, what you should do X, Y, and Z. I guess she was trying to give her some advice, and she was like, okay. Well, as soon as she leaves, she turns to one of her friends and says, how's she gonna be trying to give me advice about my marriage when hers is clearly going up in smoke? Anyway, so the other friend was like, well, she want to be your best friend. Boy, I swear, what kind of friends are they? They are just talking behind each other's back like, Next scene is the meeting with Braden Miller and Rich, and basically they exchange pleasantries. Jax introduces herself, and then Rich introduces himself. Says, my name is Rich, and he says, that's what my friends usually calls me. That's Braden saying this. I'm like, okay, we're going there, right? So anyway, they ask him, do you need any water or anything to drink or whatever? And he's like, oh, no. So then they get right down to business, and Jax asks, well, you call this meeting, can we know what it's about or whatever? And so instead of him answering her, he really directs his attention to the white man in the room. And so it's clear, like, Jax is asking the questions, but you're not answering her. You're looking at him. So anyway, he lets them know, my company is actually doing good, and we're going through this big, contract or whatever. And but the thing is, I have an issue with one of my people. I think she's higher up in the chain, but something had clearly happened. And so they were like, well, what's going on? And so Jack steps in and says, well, you don't have to tell us like specifics, but what is, being said. And so he says, well, she's accusing me of, I guess, SA basically. And so she said, well, what's your story? And he was like, yeah, well, we had relations in the past. And she was like, okay. And so she just looked at him. He was like, consensual. And did it get rough at times? Yes. Well, okay, whatever, sir. We don't need all that. But anyway, so then he says, well, we're both married or whatever. And so she was like, well, what do you want? And he said, I want an NDA. And she was like, he was like, oh, can you handle that, Jax? Basically looking at her. And so then Rich stepped in and said, I usually handle the contracts and things like that. Jax is the criminal attorney. And he was like, well, criminal, why are you here? And so she was looking at him like, well, last I checked, SA is a criminal, offense. So good thing I am here. And you could tell from there they was gonna have some issues. Like you could tell he didn't want her there, even though she's a black lady and they could relate on the black level. He clearly has an issue with females. I mean, here we go. So after the meeting, Jax goes down to her office and she meets up with the investigator, Daniel. He clearly has some kind of either crush or he's on pause with Crystal, the secretary or whatever. And he tells Jax that, oh, can you please get her? She's mean or whatever. But she's teasing him and she's like, why don't you just tell her whatever? And he's like, oh, no, I'm not going to do all of that. Anyway, he has looked up more information on Megan Stiles, the IG model that's accusing Devin McDonald of doing, making her uncomfortable or whatever. And so he gives all her the information. So she also asked, Daniel, hey, can you go ahead and investigate Kalisha Moore? That's the girl that Braden Miller has an issue with. And so he was like, okay, I'll, investigate or whatever. So then Crystal walks in before he can say anything else. And he clearly was like, hey, can I get my parking validated or whatever? She gave him his validation and he ran out. Crystal looks and she was like, he's so weird or whatever. And so she said, he thinks you're mean. She's like, I'm nice. And everybody like, okay, well, whatever. Anyway, Jax asked Crystal, what do you know about Braden Miller? And she says, lives in the Palisades with his white wife. And she said, and then she was like, asshole. And then they were like, well, there's no crime in being an asshole, which we clearly are seeing this like 100% first episode. Like there are several in this episode already. So now Jax is meeting with Devon McDonald. And she makes a recommendation for him not to do anything because she feels like the girl is basically out for money. And the manager who's there is like, no, he just signed his contract or whatever, and we need to make sure everything stays intact because he could lose a whole bunch. He could lose everything. And so she said, well, yeah, you go ahead and pay her. And so they were like, well, what do you think? And she was like, I don't think that you should pay her at all. You could pay her, and then, yeah, she may go away, but then there'll be somebody else doing the same thing, and here we go again. And so Devon was like, well, I wish it was just a way that we could, prove that I didn't do anything to her and whatever. So she says, can I have your phone? And so he gave it to her. Turns out, okay, so she's in her office after this, and she is reading a headline, and it says text messages leaked against accuser that Megan Stiles is accusing Devon of SA. And so Crystal walks in and she's like, why are you smiling like that? So anyway, they have a cackle and she tells her how, he basically asked her, hey, where do you want to go? All expenses paid and this and that, XYZ. And she texts him back saying, you could have, avoided all of this from the beginning. And so those were the text messages that were leaked. And basically he's off the hook. He don't have to do anything, just showing that she was trying to extort him. So anyway, they start talking and she was like, that is crazy. You have to do things like this. But at least now everybody will know to look out for this. So then Crystal says, hey, there's a Damon Cook that wants to speak with you. And she said, I looked him up and, ooh, he looks so good or whatever. He is in prison and he's up for parole. She's like, he is prison bait. And so she was like, is this our old client or whatever? And she was like, yeah, but you need to tell him that I no longer do public defense or whatever. And she said, well, that seems like they already told him that, but he insisted that he wanted to talk to you. And if he didn't, he was going to confess to the murder and in order to get out on parole. And so she was like, oh, no, don't tell them not to do that. Let them know that I'll go ahead and see him. Okay, so now Jax is back in the office, and she stops by Rich's office, and she asks, hey, have you heard from Braden Miller? And he's like, yeah, I talked to him, and he's actually going to hire the firm. And so she's like, okay, this is all good or whatever. And so she mentioned something about her, and Rich says, no, he actually only wants to deal with me. And she was like, oh, okay, that's fine. And he was like, well, I tried to, tell him that it would be his best interest to have you in there. And she was like, nope, that's completely fine. And so they mentioned something about Kalisha Miller or whatever, and saying that he might be right, that she wants money because I think he offered her $2 million or whatever. And she said, well, either that or she's just completely fed up and sick of y'all or whatever, or sick of them or whatever. And so then she leaves out. So then we fast forward, and she's now at the Jacinta prison facility where Damon Cook is being held. So he's led into the, I guess, interrogation room that she's meeting him in. And after the parole guy or the prison guard leaves him in there and leaves out, he takes his deep exhale and he then smiles at her. Whoo, child, we already know who he is. So Michael Ealy. And so they looking at each other with Google eyes and everything. And so she asked him, she was like, so what is this I hear about you, confessing for murder of somebody that you didn't even do? And he said, yes, I need to get out or whatever. I've been here 16 years, 5 days and 22 hours. I'm like, oh my God, he has already counted down the days. But I guess, he ain't got nothing else to do, right? So I guess he would be taking a ticker of that. Anyway, I say all that to say, she was like, if you do this, then I will never forgive you or whatever. He grabs her hands and he says, well, you like criminals. I know you and this and the third. And she's like, if you don't get your hands off of me, but she really didn't. She kind of trying to pull away, but he pulling her. And then he says, well, what if I wasn't in here? And this and the third. And then it pans to her ring and she snatches away from him. And she's like, again, if you do this, I'll never talk to you again. And she leaves out, right? And that was the end of that dramatic scene. Okay, after a long day, then she decides that she's going to meet up with one of the 4 women that she had the brunch with the other day. And her friend just went into talking about the friend that actually is getting cheated on. That happens to be her cousin, but Jax is like, I don't want to talk about her. And so then she decides to, well, let's flip it and ask Jax about all the stuff that's going on in her life. And Jax said, I just want to eat and laugh and drink. That's all I want to do today. I want to cackle like little kids. So she said, well, we're going to need some more alcohol for that. So Jax says, well, next round is on me. She said, well, we need shots. So as she goes up to the bar to get shots, Jax decides, let me call Spencer, which is her son. She gets Spencer's voicemail because he don't want nothing to do with her for some reason. He got his own issues. So after drinks, she decides to roll up on Lewis, which is her husband, and that's where Spencer and the kids are staying. And so he's like, why are you here? And you've been drinking. Did you drive here? He giving her the 3rd degree. And she's like, I just want to talk to my kids or whatever. And he's like, he don't want to talk to you, whatever. They're in there sleeping, leave them alone. And he was like, a little small argument ensues or whatever. And he's like, well, can we just talk? And so she was like, fine. So he chirps the car. And so she gets in the car, and they start talking or whatever and arguing. And come to find out, the reason why they broke up is because he told her to choose between the job and him, and she chose the job. And so now he's mad at her, and that's why he moved out, and the kids moved out with, or their joint custody, I should say. So that, I think, has a little bit to do with why Spencer is mad, because he'd rather, be with his dad than his mom or whatever. So anyway, since he had, they were in the car or whatever, after they calmed down, then one thing led to another or whatever, and he ended up, doing some things in the car with her, but then he sent her on her way, right? So anyway, on the ride share back home, she shows up at the house, and of course, who greets her there is Will, the night patrol. They end up sharing 2 cigarettes or whatever, and she says goodnight and goes in the house. So the next day, Rich is actually meeting with Kalisha Moore and her cousin, Fallon. And he was like, okay, so as she heard your representation, she said, no, I have my own law degree. She's just here, for support. So Rich ran down everything that the NDA, detailed or whatever, and he was saying, "Oh, well, you really got a good deal. We wrote it out as fair as can be or whatever." Well, you could tell that Kalisha was like, "This is a mess, right?" So she ended up tearing it up, and Rich is like, "What are you doing? This was fair." And she was like, "No, y'all keep that and tell him to stash it." So they both left out, and as they were going to the elevator, they actually ran into Jax, and Jax was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and she was like, "No, I'm sorry." And she was like, "Wait, you're Jax?" And she did the whole little thing, and she was like, "Yeah." She said, "The next time your firm takes on a client that and a black lady is saying rape, you should show up." And so this gives Jax pause, and she's like taking a deep breath, and she's about to have a whole like panic attack or whatever. So she goes into the bathroom, and she's taking a deep breath. As she's doing all of this, they flash over to Damon Cook, who's in jail. He's on his way to the parole hearing. And so he outside, and he's looking stressed, and he's rubbing his face just like Jax is. So now we got two people in distress, right? Some whole mess. So anyway, then they flip back over to Rich meeting with Braden Miller, and he was like, it didn't go like we thought it would. She didn't want to sign or whatever the case may be. And he said, "Oh, well, I guess Jax," but he actually called her something else. It was right. And he was like, "Who?" And he was like, "That other lawyer." He said, "Her name is Jax." And he was like, "Yeah, whatever." Like kind of blowing it off like, she doesn't matter, being a chauvinist basically. And so Rich was looking like, "Wow, like this is weird." And so he was like, "Yeah," he was like, "Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it." And he said, "Oh, okay." He said, "Oh, I'll send you your payment and I'll take care of it myself. I know what she needs." And he was like, "Oh, okay." And so he stood up and he walked off. So anyway, as we keep going, Jax then it flips back over to her, and she wakes up or whatever, and it is the day of Paul, which is her mom's husband's birthday party. They all show up as a family or whatever, and obviously the Mama Lou, which is Jax's mom, she greets her grandkids or whatever because it's all about them. And then she turns around and she greets Lewis and treats him like he walks on water or whatever, and kind of barely say anything to Jax, but kind of notice to her. But Jax is like she over it, so she went inside and basically grabbed a whole bottle of wine. And after a few minutes, Lewis came in to see if she was okay, and she was like, "Yeah, And obviously, he tried to make it about them or whatever. And she was like, "Don't do that," or whatever. So anyway, the rest of the party, she goes back outside. They singing happy birthday, but it was like she wasn't there. It's like she was outside looking inside on the whole thing. Well, she ends up leaving and telling Lewis, "Hey, can you handle this? I gotta leave," or whatever. And he was like, "Oh, you're so selfish. It's all about you and X, Y, and Z." And she was like, "Whatever." So she left. She got home. She had a drink, relaxing on the couch or whatever. It turned out that Damon was released on parole or whatever, and at the same time, Jax got a knock at her door, or a doorbell rang or whatever, and she answers it, and what do you know? It's Will again. He was letting her know that this is going to be his last day, and she was like, "Why?" He was like, "Well, turns out I have a record. I did something as a juvenile and somebody dug it up or whatever. And so now I have to lose my job." She was like, "Well, I want to just thank you for everything you've done or whatever. And for the pills that you gave me. I forgot what they were or whatever." And then he was like, "Well, I want to thank you too. You were so nice and X, Y, and Z." One thing leads to another, and they end up having bang bang on the couch, and the guy Lewis is actually watching them. The husband Lewis is watching them and looking like all the whole voyeur person or whatever. And he looked like he's like intrigued with it. I don't know, but it was all weird and everything. Anyway, so then they flip over to Damon. He done got out of jail, and now he looking at the moon like he a damn werewolf or something. I don't know, but it's all crazy. So then everything happened. We flip over, and Jackson's now waking up to a phone call, and it's now morning, but the phone is ringing. So she answers it, and it ends up being Rich, and she's like, "What's going on, Rich?" And he's like, "Kalisha Moore is dead." And now it ends up being a criminal case, and she is back on it. So she's gonna meet up with Rich at Braden's house. We will find out what happens in episode 2. A lot was going on in this crazy series or whatever, or crazy episode. It is really good. I cannot wait to review the rest of them. I am going to see how this actually pans out and works and what doesn't or whatever. But if you guys have any any suggestions, or even if you want to chime in, please do, because then I can actually, chime in on those suggestions and comments as well, because this was just wow, and this is just the first episode, so we have two seasons to go. It's first season and second season, and this is just the first episode. So anyway, I want to thank you for watching, and hopefully I didn't take up too much of your time, and hopefully you will watch this show if you haven't been watching it. Talk to you later. Bye.
And plus she do shows. She cover all like hands, knees, and toes. Don't lollygag, no, she just rolls. Then it's on to the next one, on to a fresh one. Woo. Ha. Said it's on to the next one, on to a fresh one. Tanesha's tip, coming all 3 speakers. Good honest reviews, book shows, and the movies all getting featured.